and welcome to this episode of my Clarendon Chronicles podcast. My guest today is Stephanie Hessler. She is the CEO and lead coach at Stephanie Hessler Coaching. Stephanie is a high performance coach and is incredibly well positioned to do this, having spent over 10 years prior to full time coaching working in investment banking and investment businesses on no less than Wall Street. During this time, Stephanie worked with CEOs, CFOs, and high level strategic teams in demanding and challenging circumstances. And as a result, Stephanie now uses her experience working with driven leaders by coaching to facilitate them becoming an even better version of themselves. In her words, to be their most exceptional self. I'm delighted Stephanie has found the time today to join me. I'm really looking forward to hearing her insights about working with her clients. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining me today. It's an incredibly busy and demanding schedule for you.
Jeremy, I'm so excited to be here. And in my investment banking and investment career, I spent a lot of time working with CFOs. So I have the highest respect and regard for people with your background, and it's really great to be here.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. We didn't rehearse that at all, so thank you for that. Can I start, if I may, Stephanie, by making that observation actually, that having studied your career, you have a reasonably similar profile in essence to myself, in that you've done something else. You've had a successful career, in your case in industry and investment banking, before you became a coach. So may I ask you, what prompted you and accelerated your passion for coaching?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's a quote from Steve Jobs that I often refer to, which is he says, "You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backward." And this isn't on my profile, but my background actually is that I'm the daughter of a corporate executive, and I grew up in 6 countries. My father worked internationally. So I grew up in a business sort of environment, meeting my parents' friends. Then after college, went to work on Wall Street, was on Wall Street for almost 10 years, right downtown Manhattan, what's now known as, well, back then was the World Financial Center. I stayed in the investment business another 6 years, both in Chicago and in Boston. I've also been a full-time working parent. I raised my kids and worked. So I have that experience as well. And in 2009, Jeremy, I left the corporate world and started my own business. And it was so much harder than I had ever imagined.
Mm.
So I enrolled in a world-class coaching program. And this is when I learned about the power of our thinking mindset. And I realized my own limiting beliefs were keeping me stuck.
Mm.
And the individual who ran this coaching program actually invited me to facilitate his programs. And I jumped in. I love the material, and I have never looked back. So I really have come to this through the back door, but it is extremely purposeful work for me. I feel like this really is the purpose of my life, is to be doing this work.
I'm smiling, Stephanie, because it's really similar to myself in that, probably having come from a background where perhaps coaching wasn't seen as something that you did 20 or 30 years ago. I think you and I would probably both recognize now that we've got to this situation where I can't see why you wouldn't have coaching and mentoring, because, for example, the relative costs of investment, and I do consider it an investment, in individuals, in teams, in systems, is so small in comparison to, say, the hiring costs.
Yes.
And in your world, Stephanie, as well, you term a significant element of your coaching as high performance coaching. Could you expand on what this means for you as a coach, and what it means for clients as well, in terms of where they may be as a person, and where, as a high performance brand, where these people might be wanting to be heading in your coaching arena?
Yes. Yeah. Great question. So I like the word high performance because we often think in terms of like athletics, of high performance. Coaching
Mhm.
is a word that we probably have borrowed from athletics. And I like to think that our lives, our careers are like an Olympic journey, right? And we want to be able to perform at our very, very highest level. I love the word better. And in fact, when my clients come to me, they're successful, high achieving individuals. They've already had a high level of success, but they know they can be doing better. And I feel like at the deepest level of our essence, we want more. We want to grow more. We want to experience life more fully. We want to experience our talents, our capabilities more fully. And perhaps the best way for me to describe this is that in my own career in the corporate world, by most definitions, I was considered very successful, but I plateaued at the VP level. And it was only when I started training in the mindset world myself that I was able to see what got me stuck, what kept me stuck. And so when you used the word passion earlier,
Mm.
my passion is to make sure that people are not going through the struggles that I went through and really bursting through their limitations to get to that next level. Because most of the time, what's holding us back is our own limited beliefs.
I I I really like that phrase you used, which was, I like the word better, because I approach my coaching again from with some of my clients who probably have reached a relatively successful part of their career. They may never have failed, but they also want to aspire to do something else. And I talk to them sometimes about what you just described there. If I was to turn around, I've got a few scars on my back from my executive career, and I hope I can help them through some of those pains. And I call it that. Before we even start, I had the conversation around, well, are you willing to accept that there isn't this perception of perfection, because we can all do better than we did yesterday? So I
Yes,
really like that phrase,
yes,
Stephanie.
yes. And Jeremy, how wonderful that you're able to share with them that you have some scars as well, right?
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
not this straight path.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
What I find is that lots of people are very keen to think in terms of a coaching capacity around all of the opportunities sometimes, all of the gains, but actually there's going to be some of the pains there as well. And some of those
Yes,
scars, if you can make those scars perhaps a little bit less deep, then
yes,
hopefully I'm doing my job. I have a
exactly.
CFO background, so and I talk to budding and aspirational CFOs by saying, do you know what, the one thing that you need to think about is how do you deal with the bad news as opposed to the good news, because that's going to happen a lot. And throughout your
Yes.
years in coaching, Stephanie,
Yeah.
the profile of your clients in this high performance arena, dealing with CEOs, high performance teams, CFOs, what do you see as common characteristics, either good or bad, Stephanie, in your clients?
Yeah. Yeah. So, the common characteristics, I would say, number one is that most of my clients are over the age of 40. And what I've found is that under the age of 40, people sometimes still think they can figure things out.
Mm,
After a while, when people start to come up against challenges or realize leaders need greater skills, they realize they need support. They need an experienced guide or mentor or coach to help them on the journey. So I think maturity is part of it. Some of the other common themes, and you mentioned C-level individuals. You've also
mm,
used the word um, aspire, which I love that word. So I do have aspiring leaders too, and I would say that's probably the bigger group in my coaching circle. These are individuals who are already, past mid-level, but really have their eye on getting into the
mm,
C-suite to continue to rise in the executive ranks. So they may have been passed over for a promotion. They may not be feeling validated or respected at the level they feel they deserve, or they may not be earning compensation or generating revenues at the level that they think. So those are some of the common themes that I see among the people, the leaders who come to me.
How interesting that you reference the maturity there. I hadn't really thought about it like that, but it makes complete sense, doesn't it? In terms of if you're younger, you know, the world's still there for attacking,
Right.
and you think you can deal with anything, and then perhaps you get to that whatever age it is and think actually this has all been done before. And I think I went through that, which is none of the problems that I work as a non-executive director as well now in the UK. And do you know what? There's not that many problems that I come across that actually you can't point towards a certain direction and say that problem is not unique. I know we've all got the change and the speed these days, but the actual essence of the problem, whether it be people or the business model or product obsolescence or increasing geographical territories,
Yes.
managing teams, you think, actually, this has all been done before. There must be people out there who can help me do it. Yeah,
Exactly. Right.
yeah,
You're absolutely correct. I mean, the problems are actually quite definable. They tend to
yes,
be recurring themes.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Your clients and your teams that you work with, Stephanie, when I'm coaching with some leaders, not all of them, I'm quite regularly struck
Hmm.
by the relative lack of confidence that some of the people I work with have. Again, not in every case, but very, very often I work with successful leaders who offer comments perfectly normally, and genuinely saying things like, I can't quite believe I've got this far without being found out. And it's sort of an
Hmm.
inner lack of confidence. And you look at their profiles and what they've achieved and think, you've achieved far more perhaps than I could ever aspire to. And yet you're still in that position of thinking, I'm not worthy is the phrase perhaps I would use. Do you see that a lot as well with your clients, Stephanie, even in your high performing clients?
I do see that. Yes. And Jeremy, I think it's a testament, to our clients trusting us also
Mm,
that they open up to that degree, right? I would say I had two events when I was younger that sort of opened me up to some of that fragility that's inside of of
mm,
humans and leaders. So one was when I was a little girl, and my father was a country manager for an international company in Lima, Peru. And there was a revolution in 1968. And literally overnight, we had to leave the country. And subsequently, my father was convinced that he was having heart problems. And I only learned years later, and I think through his own self awareness as he got older, he also became more, uh, he spoke more and shared more, that it was stress and anxiety. The doctors checked him out. There was nothing going on. It was all going inside of his mind. Of
mm,
course, we just lived through a revolution and had to
mm,
leave a country.
mm,
Who wouldn't be stressed? The second was when I was in my late 20s working in investment banking. I was working very closely with an executive team of an American company, and we had to put the roadshow on hold because of the war, the Gulf War.
mhm,
And shortly after that, I got the news that the CEO committed suicide. And at an early age, that was such a lesson in, someone may appear to be in control and have their act together and running this successful business, but we never know what's happening inside
mm,
of them.
mm,
And those two events have really, I've never forgotten about them because these were both men, and one, my father, in high positions, well respected, but a reminder that we have that fragility inside, right? And we also have a lot of mistaken beliefs and untruths that are just floating around in our heads. And I think that as coaches, Jeremy, we have this privilege to be able to hear some of people's most intimate thoughts
mm,
and to help
mm,
them understand that most of the self-deprecating information just simply isn't true.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it, when we we have great leaders that we probably think about in our careers, and yet they still must have that, as you say, that element of vulnerability, um, that there must be some kind of defense shield there that protects themselves. But when that's not there, and when the colleagues aren't there, um, who 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 motivates the motivator, I suppose, is
Right.
maybe how you would put it, and being responsible, ultimately being responsible for not just colleagues, teams, the system, customers, but also your own families and home lives as well, and what might depend on it. And it's one thing that I sometimes see as well, and I look back on it now and think you can spend 95% worrying. 95% of the things you worry about never even happen.
Correct.
So let's concentrate on the things that do happen, and try and fix those issues. Maybe the same with a coach. Yes, there's some defense mechanisms that we can put in place, but as you say, the rapport is hugely
Yes,
influential. And my experience is that maybe 3 or 4 sessions into a coaching program, that you might actually get to some of the challenges that are there that maybe weren't there in the first couple of sessions. So
that's
yeah,
right. Yes,
really interesting.
yes,
So
yes.
what are your go-to techniques then, Stephanie, for coaching individuals and teams that may, like you said, may already have achieved good things but want to achieve more? So is it challenging to combine professional and personal coaching? What techniques work for you in general? And I know it's an individual thing, but
Yes.
what things do you rely on most as a coach, Stephanie?
Yes, yes, that's a really great question. I think, different coaches have different approaches, and I've been at this now for 10 years, and I feel
Mm,
like I was mentored by a really wonderful mentor in the coaching world. So that's given me a good solid foundation. But maybe going to the second part of your question first, what I find is that my clients come to me typically with a career challenge. That is,
mm,
I would say 100% of the time,
yeah.
it's a career challenge. And then kind of as we get to know one another, and the trust builds up. As you say, you build the rapport, the trust is there. Then I learn also about challenges perhaps in their personal life.
Mm,
But because I'm a mindset coach, which means that the foundational belief is that our results are always a direct reflection of our mental landscape. And if we want to change our results, we've got to look internally first. The
yes.
root cause of our performance, the root cause of our behavior is our mind, and especially the subconscious mind. So I would say that the most foundational theme, I guess, is that leaders have to lead themselves first.
Hmm.
And that is an internal process of knowing yourself, getting super clear about your goals, what it is that you want to achieve, both professionally and personally, the vision for your life, and then looking closely at habits, those habitual thoughts, habitual beliefs, habitual behaviors, because it's only through changing habits that we're going to be able to change our performance.
I'm I'm reflecting on that as you mentioned that, Stephanie, because you've just summarized what I think was the first 12 months of my master's degree in coaching and
Mhm.
mentoring, when
Mm.
12 of us turned up on the first day, and we had 2 days together, very quite intense circumstances. And our tutors, our lecturers said, before we do any kind of academic work, we're going to work on you. And this is not going to be something that will start on Thursday and finish by Friday, which was, we joined on a Thursday and we had 2 days till the Friday. They said, this is going to take a year for you to do that. And it was exactly what you said, Stephanie.
Oh.
It's
Mhm.
mindset. Who are you? Where have you come from? what are your self-awareness thoughts? What challenges have you got? And they were very upfront about it and said it could actually be quite uncomfortable when you start to draw things like, for example, the one thing that comes to mind is they said do a lifeline, and just sketch it out. Don't take too long to think about it, but just take half an hour to sketch out on a map, on a piece of A4, your lifeline, age, and important events, things that you remember. And of course, if you've only got 30 minutes to think about that, the things that you remember really are the ones that you put on the page, and then go and
Right.
discuss. Don't go and discuss it with your peer group. Now that was really uncomfortable because there were people in tears expressing their views about
Mm,
what happened at various points in time. So I absolutely agree with that. Really good call, Stephanie, about working on yourself first to be
yeah.
able to understand what our coachees are going
Yes.
through. Have you got any success stories? Obviously anonymized, but have you
Yes.
got any success stories about how it started and how it ended with some of your clients, Stephanie?
Absolutely. Yeah. So one of my clients who actually she and I connected through LinkedIn initially, when she came to me, an investment banker had been passed over for a promotion.
Mm,
So when we started working together, of course, we looked at the type of environment she worked in, very male dominated environment. But then more importantly, we did that work of looking at her thoughts, her beliefs, her self image. And self-image is a concept that I work closely with my clients. It's the picture that we have of ourselves. And the
mm,
bottom line, the internal picture, is we can never outperform our self-image. So we've got to create kind of that next level view of ourselves and to start stepping into that future self, so to speak. So she took 100% responsibility for herself, did the work very diligently that I guide my clients through. And she was able to raise her deal revenue to $40 million, was subsequently promoted, and then was actually then recruited by an outside global investment bank to a even higher level position. Mhm.
I really like that phrase there. I know I'm going to be cutting that out. I think the exact words you used were we can never outlive our self-image,
Yes.
and that feels really one of those truisms there, which is again goes back to when I was qualifying, and that was at the heart of it as well, which is, well, how do you see yourself? And take off that whatever corporate straitjacket you've got on that you probably created that says I'm good at presenting, or I'm good with people, or I'm good technically. Actually take that off, recreate it, decide whether you still want it to be the same fit, and or do you want to expand. And that was really important to sort of detach yourself from whoever created the image, whether it would be your leader or
Yeah.
primarily yourself that's created this
Yes.
vision of you
Yes.
and how you would want to change it. And just that analysis of this is where I am and this is where I'd want to get to. The first point, really like that phrase,
Yeah.
Stephanie. Really,
It's
really
always
good.
an inside job first,
Absolutely. An
right?
inside job. I like that one as well. What one of your angles, I see
Yeah.
this from studying your work. You call it your bliss accelerator,
Yeah.
BLISS accelerator.
Yes.
And you describe that, Stephanie, as coaching with community and accountability. What does that actually mean, Stephanie?
Yes, yes. So thank you for studying my approach. I have two approaches. One is purely one-to-one private executive coaching, and the
Mm,
second is the Bliss Accelerator, which is a hybrid of one-to-one and group and community.
mm,
And Bliss is an acronym that stands for the 5 key learning areas. So the B stands for reevaluating our beliefs. The L stands for what I generally call laws, that there are success principles, success concepts. We've got to learn them. I stands for intellectual faculties. We all have higher faculties. We've got to develop them so we're not living from our sensory factors only. S is success is a system, and S, the final S, is self image. That we've got to create that expanded self-image. So what this is a combination. It's a very immersive approach. It's either 6 months or 12 months. I will sometimes make exceptions for 3 months. But in addition to one-to-one coaching with me, they're also part of a group. And these are like-minded individuals. And Jeremy, as I'm sure you know from your teamwork, that people and leaders in particular can learn so much from one another as well. And one of the wonderful things, so many wonderful things about the community, but over the years, I've also paired clients up in mastermind groups, and some of them are still going strong after all these years.
Wow, that's right.
You
That's
know,
great. It's the real vision of success and how it can work. And if I could
yes.
just follow up on that, I mean, that team ethic is really important. I guess sometimes, and you and I will have both been in the situation where the individual feels coached and the individual feels as if they're making progress, but the team dynamic, the system is preventative. And that's always a challenge. If the organization, if the culture isn't as good as it could be, sometimes our coaching has to go further, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know, Jeremy, I feel like one of the most important areas is that the team leader has to communicate the vision and really promote that feeling that this is an A team, they're here doing something special and meaningful, right? Because the individuals are only going to do as well as that visionary leader sets the environment, sets the stage.
That feels like uh, what it is now in organizations. Maybe when I started, maybe when you started, it was far more command and control,
Yes.
and leadership based on who'd been in the business longest and who was the loudest, perhaps. But what I see now in particular is that job of a leader is that the job of an influencer, the visionary. And I use an example of a lady in UK corporate actually
Mhm.
who took over as CEO of GlaxoSmithKline, GSK, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. And Dame Emma Walmsley is a lady who actually had a background in retail, in the fashion industry, and became CEO of GSK. And it was a turnaround exercise. And again,
Yeah.
that ability to be the leader
Right.
without being, I think one of the phrases used at the time was, she's not even a scientist. How can she be the leader of GSK? She's still going strong and with a very successful turnaround by being the leader and
Fascinating.
the
Yeah.
visionary.
Fascinating.
Yeah,
Yes.
really interesting. And
Hmm.
equally, Stephanie, we all know that implementing change as a leader is difficult. It's tough at the
Yes.
best of times. And how does your specific coaching philosophy inspire and an accepting agile mindset to get ahead of the change? So how do your methods help us deal with change and actually implement change?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And it is more relevant than ever because, as we all know, the rate of change is we're just bombarded daily with change and information. So, again, I go back to the individual leading themselves,
Mm,
being very grounded in themselves. Because as a leader, and particularly senior leaders, there is so much information potentially coming at you all day long. And so, what I recommend to my clients is a daily personal practice where they get very grounded in themselves and learning to keep their minds calm, open to learning, open to suggestions from others, but also enough self awareness to know when they're maybe in a trap. So it all goes back to the leading yourself. And especially with all the information coming at us, keeping a key element of my approach is maintaining a calm mind, a coherent brain. That's going to help you to be the most effective leader in today's overly informed world.
I think that's one of the things that strikes me from when I first started in an executive career, in that the speed of change, not necessarily the change, but the speed of change is just minimal and now in terms of the available time we get to implement that. And I'm not a politician, but I do from any side of the political spectrum, I do look at people in those roles and think you must have so much information, and therefore your job is to, as you say, keep abreast of the things that matter and manage yourself to be a leader. Um,
Yeah. Hmm.
Fascinating.
It
Um,
is fascinating. It's only going to get more
it's
complex.
more complex, all
Hmm.
of the more change, quicker. Amazing. Finally, Stephanie, I'd like to ask you about one of your very recent blogs, actually. So,
Hmm.
when I first entered the coaching arena, one of the most important things, we talked about it today, actually, was to recognize that change doesn't happen without acute self-awareness. Um,
Hmm.
and it can be quite uncomfortable to do
Yes.
that, to look in the mirror and, first of all, accept, as you said, we can get better from one of your earlier comments. So,
Yes.
what's your philosophy for supporting clients in that self-awareness? Because I guess they could go the other way, which is, oh my goodness, I'm going the
Right.
wrong way. How do you support your clients going through
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
change process themselves?
So, a few minutes ago, when I gave you the example of my client, the investment banker, who was then
Mm,
subsequently promoted to managing director, and I think I said she did the work. And the work in my coaching process is, I have a workbook, and this workbook requires self-reflection. And it's that self-reflection process, like you just used the phrase holding up the mirror, that holds up the mirror, right? Where leaders have to take the time and reflect, sometimes at a very granular level, on their thoughts, their beliefs, their behaviors. And that's the process that builds the self-awareness. And of course, then we get on coaching calls and I ask, like I'm sure you do, questions in order to continue to help them to enhance that self-awareness. And Jeremy, as I'm sure you've discovered, once someone's self-awareness is opened up, there is no going back.
yes. Yeah. I think that's really relevant. And I recall one of the phrases which a former board director um, said to me, this is probably going back 20 years ago now, but it's relevant so much to the coaching arena as well. And going back to your analysis of how can you keep on track with what's important. So his phrase to me was, and I can hear him saying it, Jeremy, never undervalue thinking time. And I said, well, what do you mean?
That's
And he
right.
said, and he said at the time, I remember thinking, um, should I ask him this question? I said, well, how much time do you spend thinking? And he said, I think for at least half of the week. And if people think that I'm not doing anything because I'm not on the phone or on a call or doing something else, that's something I need to work on to let them know what I'm doing. But I'm thinking, and I'm thinking about the organization, the teams, how we get better, to take your phrase.
Oh, I
Really
love
interesting,
that.
Stephanie.
That
Really
is
interesting.
so good. And
Yeah,
Jeremy, one big problem is most people aren't thinking.
yeah,
It's a
absolutely right.
problematic.
Absolutely. It sounds so simple, doesn't it? But having that ability to just stand back, be self-aware, accept that the perception of perfection isn't there. I really like that phrase. How do we
Hmm.
get better? Stephanie, thank you so much for your time today. Really great insights. I really wanted to have you on my podcast because you had that slightly similar background to me,
Yes.
having had a different career, and hear your thoughts on how you've managed to do that since, as you say, since 2009. So please, can you share with the audience how do we find you? How do we get in contact with you
Yes.
in this big wide world of ours?
Yes. Yes. So I'm probably most active on social media on LinkedIn, and I have a growing YouTube channel. So I hope to have your audience follow me there as well.
Yeah.
And for anyone who's interested, they can go to my website, stephaniehessler.com, and download their free career elevation checklist and guide.
Okay, you heard it here, stephaniehessler.com. Stephanie, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time today over in the US. You're based near Boston, I think you mentioned as well,
Yes.
in Massachusetts. Thank you so much for sparing us the time today. Really
Oh,
interesting. I'm sure the audience will have found it fascinating to hear your thoughts on coaching and your high performance brands as well. So thank you so much, Stephanie.
thank you, Jeremy.
Okay, and that's been this week's episodes of Clarendon Chronicles podcast. Join me next time. Bye for now.